Lots of folks are protesting the Israel, Palestine, and Iran conflict. I've seen lots of folks making assessments, but not seeming to know what they're even really talking about or protesting. So, what the hell is going on? How are the targets by these states even legal? Stick with me and I'll clear it all up. Hello, all you beautiful people. World's Okayest lawyer here. Today, we're going to talk about the Geneva Conventions, targeting, and collateral damage. By the end, you may not like what I have to say, but it would be the basics of law without getting into the specific and difficult nuances of striking a military target. So, folks are throwing around terms like targeting and collateral damage, but do you even know where the rules of war come from? If you said the Geneva Conventions, then you are correct. If you said, just common international law, you are also correct. Now, do you know how many Geneva Conventions there are? If you answered 4 plus 3 additional protocols, you are also correct. So what about targeting, types of weapons, and collateral damage? If you said a whole bunch of different laws, then that is the right answer because no one body of law encompasses all aspects of war. As this is a very dense subject, I'm going to discuss the 4 conventions at a 10,000 foot level. Geneva Convention 1 refers to the wounded and sick and is all about respect and protect. It breaks people down into 3 categories from combatants, who are the people you're fighting against, and non-combatants, who are generally the folks providing care. In order to qualify as wounded and sick, you must be out of the fight. So, for example, a combatant has a critical injury that could potentially take their life. However, they're choosing to use their last breaths to continue to fight their enemy instead of laying down their weapon to receive care. This combatant would not be out of the fight, so would not qualify for GC1 or Geneva Convention 1 protections. However, if they set their weapon down to the side and then they can no longer be targeted under GC1 and qualify for medical treatment. Yes, countries take care of the wounded and sick of enemy soldiers. Objects that are protected under GC1 are generally medical facilities, medical transports, and medical aircraft for obvious reasons. If we're at war with another country, we would not want to target their medical transports as they could potentially have our soldiers being taken care of, although they're now considered prisoners of war and vice versa. GC2 just discusses wounded and sick at sea, but it's literally the same thing as GC1. GC3 discusses protections for prisoners of war or POWs. There are 6 groups of persons. 1, members of the armed forces that are a party in the conflict. 2, members of militias, but there are specific acts that they need to do, such as be commanded, have a distinctive sign recognizable at a distance, carry arms openly, and also respect laws and customs of war, which is why terrorist organizations don't really qualify. 3, members of armed forces not recognized by detaining power. 4, civilians accompanying the force, which could be contractors or even those who are part of the media that is embedded. So if you watch the news and you see that the U.S., for example, is doing some sort of strikes and stuff, that there may be a war correspondent that is reporting on what is going on the ground. 5, merchant crews and crews of civilian aircraft. And then 6, members of levée en masse, which is just those who are forced into their nation's military or forced conscription. If you've been paying attention to the news, Ukraine has been doing this since the Russian invasion. Under GC3, POWs are entitled to humane treatment, medical care, freedom from violence, and judicial actions under same method as regular soldiers. GC4 discusses protected persons. To keep it easy, it's probably better to explain who is not a protected person. Nationals of states not party to the Geneva Conventions. It may shock you, but not every country is a signatory. Persons protected by GC1, 2, or 3. Nationals of neutral or co-belligerent and belligerent state if normal diplomatic relations, and a co-belligerent is generally an ally. A belligerent state simply means the enemy state. A neutral party would be like Switzerland. Switzerland is the most neutral country in the whole wide world. Nationals of co-belligerent state in an occupation. Think how Afghanistan and Iraq were after the operations and how countries brought in contractors to bring the country back. Lastly, civilians in their home country detained by the enemy. So, are Israel, Iran, or Palestine signatories to the Geneva Conventions? Israel became a signatory to the conventions in 1951, Iran in 1957, Palestine in 2014. So, targeting weapons of war and collateral damage is a heavy, heavy topic. So, to keep it simple, we will start with weapons of war. Generally, a prohibited weapon is one that can cause superfluous injuries or is inherently indiscriminate. Weapons that have been banned are poison, including poison weapons, biological weapons, certain environmental modification techniques, weapons that injure by fragments that are not detectable by X-ray. So, I don't know, maybe some sort of plastic, certain types of landmines and booby traps, and blinding lasers. Lawful weapons are certain types of mines and booby traps, cluster munitions, incendiary weapons, laser weapons, riot control agents, herbicides, think Agent Orange, nuclear weapons, and explosive ordnance and remnants of war. So what about targeting and collateral damage? Each country develops their own national security laws, but it always starts with military necessity. In the US, the framework of war is based on military necessity, which is just no destruction for its own sake, but only all measures actually needed. However, when quickly and efficiently, which if you've ever read The Art of War, that's exactly what it's talking about. The Rendulic rule determines that a commander is only liable for the information reasonably available at the time of the lethal decision. So, for example, let's say there's a radio station that Osama bin Laden was going to every night. Intelligence showed that it was only Osama bin Laden and his supporters that would be there every night. Prior to the strike of Osama bin Laden, Eyes On showed there were no civilians present at the time of the strike. Unbeknownst to the commander and intelligence, there was a secret employee entrance that had underground parking in a cave, and there was a dinner party being had at the same time of the strike. Under the Rendulic rule, the commander would not be in trouble because the actionable intelligence did not disclose this information at the time of the strike. Next, you get to distinction when conducting attacks. When it comes to people, you must analyze status and context. Status just means, are they a belligerent and what is their conduct at the time? So let's say it's World War II and I am a member of the Great Britain military. I am walking down the streets of Paris. I'm in my uniform. I'm looking good AF when I see a member of the German SS in their uniform drinking coffee. I walk up to him, pull out my sidearm, and shoot him dead. At no point was he threatening. Is that legal? Yup. He is a distinct member of the enemy armed forces. Now let's say I'm a member of the Canadian military. I'm walking the streets of Iraq when I see a military-aged male I suspect being a member of a terrorist organization drinking chai at a corner market. He is wearing civilian clothing. I walk up to him and shoot him dead. Is that legal? Nope. There was nothing distinct about him to show he was a member of an enemy military. Now, what if this same fellow is strictly on his conduct of having an AK-47 hanging over his arm? Still not legal. And in fact, if you've ever been to the Middle East, that's actually not uncommon. What if he was aiming the AK-47 at me at the time of shooting? Now the conduct is sufficient to demonstrate he is a belligerent. Now, when it comes to things or buildings, generally museums, hospitals, ambulances, national treasures, you could probably think of 100 other different things, are all protected. However, if an enemy belligerent, regardless if they are a member of the enemy's military or if they're a non-state actor, if they begin to use these facilities or objects as their home base, then you can still target the bad guys who are inside or around the national treasure. You just can't target the protected thing. The mere fact that the hospital is destroyed is incidental to the strategic military target of the enemy force. So what do I mean by this? I mean that they are sitting in the basement of this hospital. I'm not aiming at the hospital. I'm aiming at the person that's down in the basement. So I may use a heavy-duty bomb that will penetrate the entirety of the hospital in order to strike that strategic military target that is sitting in the basement. Now we're finally to proportionality and collateral damage. When in battle, it's not that civilians cannot be harmed, it's only that a military force cannot bring excessive harm to civilians. Militaries are to take feasible precautions to reduce harm to protected persons and objects. For example, you may hear that a military will drop leaflets or make announcements throughout a particular area that they will be targeted shortly and to get out of the area. In fact, this is a common tactic that Israel performs all the time when they make strikes in Gaza or the West Bank. If the civilians choose to stay, then the military has done all that they are required to do to prevent excessive civilian casualties as they execute their direct military advantage. So what about dropping a nuclear bomb on a city? So long as the laws of armed conflict and the rules of engagement support the use of a nuclear weapon, it's 100% legal. The military justification must be to not cause unnecessary suffering regardless of the type of weapon used. Their legal argument can even be that they are protecting their own force by not being in a protracted military conflict that could cause excessive casualties of their own force. We actually saw this in Japan, and what happened in Japan is actually considered legal. So as Israel, Iran, and Palestine have all made strikes against one another, have there been any illegal strikes? The easy answer is yes. When Hamas flew into Israel, and let's just be honest, Hamas is the de facto government of Gaza, and I'm not really sure which one is the West Bank, but when Hamas flew into Israel on October 7th, 2023, they violated GC1 and GC4 when they killed, raped, and mutilated upwards of 1,200 civilians that were at an outdoor festival. It was really a rave, but let's just call it a festival, along with kidnapping another 235 citizens. Some of these that were kidnapped have since been raped, tortured, and killed, also in violation of GC1 and GC4. They also violated the law of armed conflict, as the participants in the outdoor festival were all protected persons. They were unlawful targets. By raping, mutilating, and murdering the participants, they did not perform any distinction, proportionality, or prevention of unnecessary suffering. What was reported by the news was war crimes. What about Iran's drone strike of Israel on April 13, 2024? In my world's okayest opinion, this appears on its face legal. All reports seem to indicate that the targets were lawful as they were Israeli military bases. It's also safe to presume that Iran knew that Israel would have a resounding success of preventing the drone strikes from reaching their targets, as 99% of all attempted strikes were protected by Israel's Iron Dome. What about Israel's strikes in Iran on April 19, 2024? In my world's okayest opinion, this also appears on its face legal. Iran reported that Israel launched many drones and they caused no damage or casualties. In fact, Iran national news did not even call out Israel for the attack, but instead said the attacks were from infiltrators that could be a diplomatic means of not causing another Middle East war. And so what do I mean by that? Iran is not surrounded by allies. They're surrounded by generally enemies. But the other deal is they really just don't want to get into a war with Israel, which could be another way for America to get into another damn war. Now, what about Israeli strikes in Gaza that have killed civilians, including women and children? In my world's okayest opinion, and this might surprise you, but these are all likely legal. Now you may ask, why is it legal that Israel kills Palestinian citizens, but it was illegal when Palestinians killed Israeli citizens? Remember, when it comes to targeting, there are the four principles of the law of armed conflict of 1, military necessity, 2, distinction, 3, proportionality, and 4, unnecessary suffering. Until the evidence to the contrary comes out that says otherwise, Israel's strikes are not targeting citizens, but belligerents that are using the citizens as shields, or unlawfully having a base of operation in hospitals, or other typically unlawful targets, which could even be a mosque. As stated before, Israel also has a regular practice of dropping leaflets to warn citizens of impending attacks. They also will broadcast radio messages. So now what Israel is experiencing from the media and protesters is what's called lawful but awful. Everything Israel is doing appears legal, but just because something is legal does not mean you should do it. Israel may have actually been better served putting infantry units in Gaza to go building to building to perform in person strikes with their Iwi Tavor, which is their military rifle of choice, to combat Hamas using a scalpel instead of a machete. However, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't put it back. I hope you were able to follow all of that. Like what I had to say, please be sure to follow, like, subscribe, and share me on whatever social media you saw this posted. I cannot thank you enough for listening to what my world's okayest opinions are. Lastly, it costs $0 to be kind. It's the best money that you'll ever spend. Until next time, beautiful people. Peace.